It's time for us to talk about our main event here, and we are going to one of the marquee divisions in the UFC. It is the lightweight division, and it is the first title defense for probably one of the most surprising champions in the division's history, Charles Oliveira. He's going to be taking on, though, a guy who many people believe is already the best lightweight in the world, Dustin Poirier. And I think it's been very interesting to see how people have sort of treated Charles Oliveira in these sort of 6 or 7 months since he won the belt, because I mean no disrespect to Charles Oliveira, because I think he's a fantastic fighter. The growth he's made over the past 4 or 5 years has been fantastic. But there are a lot of people out there who, rather unfairly, don't see him as a legitimate champion. And I think that's maybe because he never fought the Justin Gaethjes, the Dustin Poiriers of the world. There was a Michael Chandler fight which he won, which he did struggle before he managed to get the win. And I think it's maybe a bit unfair that some of the treatment, like people are almost treating this as if it's already a cakewalk for Dustin Poirier. Charles Oliveira is a live dog in this fight.
Yeah, I'm definitely not treating it like a cakewalk at all. I mean, it's an extremely competitive matchup. But I do think that it is fair to say that Poirier is the more legitimate champion of the two. I think that Oliveira getting that path to the title, especially in retrospect. I mean, especially in retrospect with how shot Tony Ferguson has looked, with how, maybe fringe top 5 Chandler has looked. I don't think Oliveira being, the undisputed champion is too legitimate, but you still got to give him credit. I mean, he was, kind of almost a journeyman flyweight or a featherweight for a few years, reinvented himself at this lightweight weight class. Took one loss, but went on a crazy streak, a lot of finishes. And, obviously has reinvented himself, improved his striking massively. He had been known for kind of wilting and quitting in a few fights. We've seen him come back a few times, got poked in the eye versus Tamer, came back and won, got dropped early versus Chandler, came back and won. So Oliveira, I mean, is reinventing himself at this lightweight weight class. And I think his stock has honestly rose since he gained the title. I mean, I don't know if he speaks English himself or he has somebody translating his tweets, but he tweets out funny shit all the time. So you gotta love both these guys, both great fighters, both great guys outside the cage, and this is just an A+ elite level fight. It doesn't get any better than this in MMA.
What do you think is the big changes that Charles Oliveira's made that's turned him from that sort of action fighter, always getting the submissions, to being a champion?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with his strength of schedule. I do think that. I think that if you look at his wins in that win streak, he has like a plethora of like B tier wins. Guida and Miller and Tamer, Jared Gordon, Kevin Lee. These are good fighters, but they're not really close to top 15, top 10. I mean, he really, Lee was top 10 at the time. Ferguson was, but not actually. And so is Chandler. He really has 3 top 10 wins out of those 8 wins. So I think obviously not cutting the weight is big for him. He, used to really deplete himself getting down to 145. And I think that kind of contributed to a few of the times that he wilted in fights. But now not having to cut weight, I think that there's just clear improvements in his striking technique. I think he must have gotten with a new striking coach at some point over the past 3 or 4 years. And, he's got that, Thai style of striking, mixes in knees, kicks, elbows, punches really well. His boxing has gotten better. So I think that it's A, the weight cut, and B, his improvements in his striking, honestly, not being completely reliant on that grappling. He still is an A+ grappler, still has no submissions in MMA history or UFC history. I doubt anyone will ever beat that, right? But he's not completely reliant on that grappling. He has the striking to go along with it now.
I think he's a lot more composed than he used to be. And I think that there was once upon a time where Charles Oliveira, because he didn't have the confidence in his striking that he does now, there was this urgency to get a fight to the ground as quickly as he could. This time around, though, he's a lot more patient. He's a lot more happy to strike. And I think especially his kick game is something which has made a lot of improvements, because he's a long guy for lightweight. and he's got I think got a pretty decent kick on him. And we see it as well. There was often a time where Charles Oliveira, he would often crumble when he had a lot of pressure and he faced a lot of adversity. I think that's something which has changed as well. We saw that against Chandler. Like, there were plenty of times when Michael Chandler was on the verge of winning the fight, but Charles Oliveira was able to ride it out and then got the finish right at the start of the second round.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that earlier. It seems like his toughness, his resilience has leveled up a little bit. I mean, if you go back and watch that Tamer, I mean, I think both of Tamer's fingers go right into his eyes. I mean, his eyes are bright red. He's like crying, tearing up, like can barely see. I was for sure thinking that he was gonna, take the no contest, take the DQ or whatever. He kept fighting and he submitted Tamer just a few minutes later. So I think that his durability is still a concern. You saw the way he got dropped by that punch versus Chandler. It's just his he does have that mental fight in him now to recover and to fight back. So he's definitely improved in that area.
And I think mental toughness as well is something which has really been, you could see it a lot in Dustin Poirier as well. Like, I'm going to read some of Dustin Poirier's wins over his past couple of years. Conor McGregor twice, Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez, Anthony Pettis, Max Holloway twice. This is like a who's who of some of the best sort of middle-class fighters, lightweight, featherweight, that you can come across. Like, we've got a guy here who is on the verge of being a UFC Hall of Famer. And if he gets this lightweight belt, he's all but locked his place in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's hard to put. I don't put too much credence into the Hall of Fame, but I mean, I think he's pretty much already at that level. Wins over McGregor, Hooker, Holloway, Alvarez, and Gaethje is just incredible. I mean, those that could be half of the best lightweights of the past 10 years, and Poirier has beat them all decisively. And this is just such an amazing matchup. It really is hard to pick who you are going to. There's who you want to win, who you think is going to win, and I definitely want Poirier to win. But because I want him to win, I'm giving even more of a chance to Charles Oliveira because, getting down to the matchup, it should be a striker versus grappler matchup, right? I mean, Oliveira is going to be able to hang at times on the feet with Poirier, but you got to think the longer the fight stays on the feet, the prolonged striking exchanges, especially later in the fight where Poirier is much more experienced, you got to think that favors the better boxer, the better striker in Dustin Poirier. He's also much more durable as well. We've seen Poirier eat, tons and tons of damage and, not even get wobbled, not even get dropped. And we've seen Oliveira get dropped with, some glancing type of punches. And then the striking, I'd say, is about 70-30 for Poirier, right? 70% of the exchanges should be going Poirier's way. The grappling, on the other hand, is probably, 90-10 for Oliveira. So you got to think that Oliveira is going to be wanting to get this fight to the floor. He's going to be looking to wrestle here pretty urgently. And the fight really comes down to how urgently Oliveira wrestles. Because in some fights of his, we've seen him wrestle right away, hit takedowns, and show his immaculate top game. Some fights we've seen him strike a little bit, maybe look to mix in the wrestling later. I don't think he can strike first versus Poirier. I think he really needs to get off wrestling early, and I think he likely needs to get a takedown to translate it into a finish in the first round or two, because after that, I think the round 3, 4, and 5 experience really favors Dustin Poirier. I mean, Poirier has been scheduled for 5 rounds for what is it? I'm looking at 8 fights in a row here, I think.
Yeah, I think
he's gone the full 5 rounds against Holloway.
I think Dustin Poirier's last 3-round fight,
UFC 211.
Yes, the Eddie Alvarez fight
was Alvarez. Yeah. So he's gone. He knocked out Gaethje in round 4. He beat Holloway over 5 rounds. He withstood the early storm from Dan Hooker in rounds 1 and 2 and came back in 3, 4, 5. Poirier is used to rounds 3, 4, and 5. He can go that full 25 minutes. He's just a lot more familiar with his cardio. So you got to think, if it gets out of round 2, it's probably favoring Dustin Poirier at that point. But I'm still not discounting Charles Oliveira finding a finish in rounds 1 and 2 because Oliveira's wrestling is good. His top game is great. His submissions are great. And he really could finish Dustin Poirier in the early rounds here because Poirier has struggled defensive grappling wise. He, obviously was defeated, and I don't think he fought to his highest potential versus Khabib. He panicked a bit at times. He felt the pressure. He made a few mistakes because he was frustrated, and I think he will be a bit better prepared for the grappling here versus Oliveira. What I really look at for this fight is who the guys that he's been training with. He's been training with Mateusz Gamrot, Mosvar Evelev, like some real high-level grapplers up at ATT that are going to help him get prepared for this fight. So I've been talking for a bit. I'll pass it back to you, Carl. What are you thinking about the matchup?
I'm glad you mentioned Gamrot there because Gamrot is a hell of a good jiu-jitsu guy. So I think if there's somebody who you want to replicate the game of Charles Oliveira, I think Gamrot is one of your best choices. I'm very similar to you. I think we're going to see Charles Oliveira much more eager to go to the ground than he did against Michael Chandler. So I can see the takedowns trying to come thick and early. I do share some of the concerns in terms of Dustin's takedown defense. And I also think Dustin can maybe sometimes be a little bit porous with his striking. Like, I go back to the Dan Hooker fight. He ate a lot of big shots against Dan Hooker, who was another similarly long-framed lightweight fighter, much in the same way of Charles Oliveira. But Charles Oliveira has a very long frame, and I can see Dustin Poirier hammering that body. And I think it could be one of those situations where he takes those sort of big shots, and then come the 4th and 5th rounds, the damage becomes too much, and Dustin Poirier gets the win.
Yeah, I like that prediction. Looking at the odds here, Poirier minus 163. That's about 63%. I think it's about right. I think Poirier should be the deserved favorite here. I give him the cardio edge, the durability edge, the boxing edge. He really just has to defend the takedowns. I don't think he's gonna defend the takedowns. I don't think he's going to stuff the shots straight out. He's going to get taken down initially, and then he needs to, safely work back to his feet, not let Oliveira get a hold of his neck, not give up his back to Oliveira, because he's not going to have that same explosive athleticism as Michael Chandler to be able to explode out of that back take. But we have seen Oliveira get the takedowns on guys, get submission attempts, seem to have good advantage positions, not be able to finish them, and then he wilted. Then he got knocked out. The Paul Felder fight is the one I'm talking about. His most recent loss. He took down Felder. He had Felder in some good submission attempts. Felder not a particularly great grappler, and he was able to just gut out those submission attempts, not get stopped, and started hammering away on Oliveira there. So I think it's going to be really sweaty. I mean, I'm definitely not betting Dustin Poirier here. I love the guy. I'm not going to be betting him because I think rounds 1 and 2, I mean, there's a real grappling threat that we have to be aware of. And, as a big Dustin Poirier fan, I'm kind of prepared for him to lose. I am. I think that, I don't know, I'm just getting vibes that Oliveira is going to take him down. I'm getting vibes that, Poirier hasn't quite fixed up all those holes in his grappling defense from the Khabib fight. We saw him get taken down and mounted by Eddie Alvarez a few years back as well. And I just think that if Oliveira gets his right fight with the grappling, I think he really could pull off a finish in the early rounds here with a submission likely over Poirier. So if I'm betting Oliveira, I would probably take him by rounds 1, 2, and 3 finish. Maybe Charles sub round 1, sub round 2, and then maybe look to live bet Poirier after to see how he's doing with the takedowns. So gun to my head pick, I'm going Dustin Poirier, likely knockout in round 3 or 4.
At the moment, the INC poll has this 60-40 in favor of Dustin, which I think is pretty much the same way I'm leaning as well. I am going to pick Dustin Poirier to win this one. I'm going to say 4th round stoppage, but I'm in a very similar boat to you as well. Charles Oliveira is a very live dog in this fight. There is a big possibility of him getting that early submission, which I think is the way, if Oliveira is going to win this fight, that's how it's going to happen. And if Charles Oliveira does win this fight, bearing in mind what Dustin Poirier has done this year, bearing in mind that he's the A side going into this pay-per-view, what does that do to the perception of Charles Oliveira?
I think it drops it a little bit. But he is the underdog fight. People know that Poirier is a tough matchup for him. You're gonna hear some idiots call him, paper champ, all this bullshit. I mean, there's no need to insult the man. I mean, I would never.
Mm.
I question the legitimacy of his belt. I'm not gonna sit there and call him a paper champ and tweet at him and insult him or whatnot. I mean, it's not his fucking fault the UFC decided to make that fight for the undisputed lightweight championship. He won the fight. It's his belt. And I think he'll still be around for a long time without even if he loses this fight, yeah, he's not going anywhere. I'm sure he'll bounce back. I would love to see him fight Benil Dariush, Islam Makhachev. I mean, those are real fun matchups, and he's going nowhere. So, Oliveira, I think could still have a good 3 or 4 years left in his career after this.
And I think I'm glad you mentioned that about Charles Oliveira, because in my opinion, any fighter who becomes UFC champion has to deserve it in some way. They have to have done something and have some kind of talent. There aren't people who are just given belts. They've got to do something to earn it. Even if you're
Nico.
a Nico Montano or a Dave Mene or someone of that sort of ilk, they still had some good qualities to warrant getting the belt anyway. So, and I think Charles Oliveira's in that boat. I mean, the guy was on a 9-fight winning streak. You can't be a bad fighter and be on a 9-fight winning streak in the UFC.
No. I mean, yeah, he's terrific. And this is, like I said, A+ versus A+, elite level matchup. In these fights, they're extremely competitive. And what we have been saying, the last thing I'll say though, is I think like 9 of the past 10 main events have gone the distance. A lot of those fights have been favored to end inside the distance. A lot of those fights have had crazy moments where you think it's going to finish, crazy back and forth wars like Fontenaldo and Vettori and
Lad versus Dumont
and Costa. But 9 out of the past 10. Yeah, 9 out of the past. Yeah, crazy war in that one. But we're seeing a lot of main events go the distance lately, so we're kind of on a trend for that. Even though this one is extremely likely to end inside the distance, the odds have it at like minus 550 to go inside the distance. So that's 85% to end by finish. So it would be crazy to see this one go cards.